The Whispering Woods had always been a place of legend and fear in the small town of Ravenscroft. Tales of eerie silences and mysterious disappearances were passed down through generations, each story more chilling than the last. The dense forest, with its gnarled trees and perpetual fog, seemed to whisper secrets to those brave enough to venture near. Locals avoided the woods, claiming it was cursed, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead was perilously thin. Emily had heard these stories all her life, but she had never given them much thought. That was until her brother, Jack, vanished without a trace. Determined to find him, Emily ignored the warnings and set out to uncover the truth. She was a strong-willed young woman, driven by a fierce love for her brother and an unyielding determination to bring him back. Jack had always been adventurous, often exploring places others wouldn't dare to go. The last anyone had heard from him was a cryptic message left on Emily's phone, mentioning the Whispering Woods and something he had discovered. Then, silence, with nothing but a backpack, a flashlight, and the hope of finding her brother. Emily headed towards the foreboding forest. As she approached the edge of the woods, a chill ran down her spine. The air grew colder, and an unnatural stillness settled around her. The whispers began, soft and unintelligible, like the murmurs of lost souls. Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself against the rising fear. She had to find Jack. With one final glance back at the town, she stepped into the darkness of the Whispering Woods, unaware of the horrors that awaited her. Emily's car rumbled to a stop at the edge of the small town of Ravenscroft. The town, nestled near the infamous Whispering Woods, seemed to be in a state of perpetual twilight, with gray clouds hanging low and casting eerie shadows. The few locals she encountered eyed her warily, their gazes filled with a mix of pity and warning. She checked into the only motel in town, a rundown establishment that had seen better days. The motel owner, an elderly woman with deep-set eyes and a wary expression, handed her the key with a trembling hand. "You're not planning to go into those woods, are you?" the woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, her resolve unwavering. "I'm looking for my brother. He went missing in there." The woman's eyes widened with fear. "Those woods ... they've taken many. If you value your life, stay away." Ignoring the ominous warning, Emily thanked the woman and made her way to her room. That night, she couldn't sleep. The weight of the unknown pressed heavily on her chest, and the whispers she had heard earlier seemed to echo in her mind. Determined to find Jack, she rose early the next morning and gathered her gear. The path to the Whispering Woods was overgrown, as if nature itself was trying to keep people out. As Emily walked, the air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around her. The whispers began again, faint and indistinct, sending shivers down her spine. She reached the edge of the forest just as the sun began to rise, casting long, sinister shadows on the ground. Taking a deep breath, Emily stepped into the woods, her senses on high alert. The atmosphere changed immediately, the whispers grew louder, and an oppressive silence settled over the forest. Emily pressed on, following a barely visible trail. She soon came across remnants of previous visitors, old tents, discarded belongings, and weathered notes warning others to turn back. The realization that others had been here and never returned made her heart race, but she pushed the fear aside. As she ventured deeper, the trees seemed to close in, their twisted branches creating a maze of shadows. Emily's determination only grew stronger. She had to find Jack, no matter the cost. But as the day wore on, the forest's eerie presence became more palpable, and the whispers grew more insistent, as if the woods themselves were trying to communicate with her. Emily's footsteps echoed in the unnerving silence of the Whispering Woods. Every crunch of leaves underfoot sounded amplified, disturbing the eerie quiet. The trees loomed overhead, their branches like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. The whispers seemed to surround her now, coming from all directions, making it impossible to pinpoint their source. As she walked, Emily stumbled upon remnants of past visitors. An old, weather-beaten tent lay collapsed, its fabric torn and covered in moss. Scattered around it were personal items, a rusted flashlight, a tattered journal, and a photograph of a family smiling on a sunny day. The stark contrast between the happiness captured in the photo and the grim reality of the abandoned campsite sent a chill down her spine. Emily picked up the journal, its pages damp and brittle. Flipping through it, she found entries detailing the experiences of a man named Henry, who had ventured into the woods searching for his missing daughter. The last entry was hastily scrawled, the words barely legible. "They're watching. I hear them whispering. I must find her before it's too late. .. double quotes. She closed the journal, her resolve hardening. She was not the first to search these woods, but she was determined not to become another lost soul. As she pressed on, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to be calling her name, urging her deeper into the forest. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees. Emily knew she needed to find a place to set up camp for the night. She found a small clearing and quickly pitched her tent, her hand shaking slightly. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped, and the whispers grew more insistent, as if the forest itself was alive and watching her every move. Inside her tent, Emily tried to block out the whispers and get some rest, but sleep eluded her. Her mind raced with thoughts of Jack and the horrors he might have faced. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig outside sent her heart racing. In the dead of night, she awoke to a chilling sound, the unmistakable voice of her brother, calling her name. She bolted upright, her flashlight in hand, and shone it into the darkness outside her tent. The forest was silent, the whispers momentarily hushed, as if holding their breath. Summoning her courage, Emily stepped out of the tent and called out, "Jack, is that you?" The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint, mocking whispers that resumed their sinister chorus. The darkness of the whispering woods was impenetrable, the faint light from Emily's flashlight barely piercing the inky blackness. The temperature had dropped significantly, and a cold, damp mist had settled over the forest. The whispers, now more distinct and urgent, seemed to swirl around her, each breath of wind carrying fragmented words that sent shivers down her spine. Emily's heart pounded as she scanned the surrounding trees, her flashlight casting eerie, dancing shadows. The voice she had heard, her brother's voice, had sounded so real, so close. She took a tentative step forward, her eyes straining to see anything in the oppressive darkness. "Jack," she called out again, her voice trembling. The whispers seemed to respond, their tones shifting to a more frantic, almost pleading pitch. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she caught a glimpse of a figure moving between the trees. It was fleeting, a shadow within the shadows, but unmistakable. Without thinking, she began to follow, her fear momentarily forgotten in her desperate need to find her brother. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees becoming more twisted and menacing. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks threatening to trip her with every step. After what felt like an eternity, Emily stumbled into another clearing. In the center stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its bark etched with strange, cryptic symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. At the base of the tree, partially covered in moss and leaves, was a small, weathered book. Emily picked it up, her hands shaking, and began to flip through its pages. The book was filled with dark, arcane writings and drawings of grotesque creatures. One page, in particular, caught her eye. It depicted a ritual with figures bound and sacrificed under the very tree she stood beside. The whispers grew louder, almost frantic, as if trying to warn her or drive her away. Suddenly, a cold hand clamped down on her shoulder. Emily spun around, her flashlight beam catching the ghastly face of a man, eyes hollow, skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. His mouth moved, but the words were drowned out by the cacophony of whispers. She stumbled back, dropping the book, and fled back to her camp. Her mind raced with fear and confusion. The image of the spectral figure burned into her memory. She collapsed inside her tent, trying to calm her racing heart. The whispers seemed to press in on her, growing louder and more insistent. That night, sleep came in fitful, nightmarish bursts. Emily dreamt of shadowy figures and heard her brother's screams echoing through the woods. She saw visions of the dark ritual from the book, the gnarled tree, and the ancient symbols. She awoke several times, drenched in sweat and shaking, only to find the whispers still haunting her. By the time dawn broke, Emily felt as if she hadn't slept at all. The morning light brought little comfort. The forest remained as foreboding and sinister as ever. Determined to press on, she packed her gear, her resolve steeled by the need to uncover the truth and find Jack. As the pale light of dawn filtered through the twisted canopy of the whispering woods, Emily felt a renewed sense of determination. The horrors of the night lingered in her mind, but the thought of her brother, possibly still out there and in need of help, pushed her forward. She packed up her camp quickly, trying to shake off the lingering fear that clung to her like a second skin. The path ahead was even more overgrown and treacherous, the trees seeming to grow closer together, their branches intertwining to form a nearly impenetrable barrier. Emily pressed on, using her flashlight to cut through the gloom. The whispers had quieted somewhat, but they were still present, a constant reminder that she was not alone. As she ventured deeper into the forest, she began to notice signs of a struggle: broken branches, disturbed earth, and the occasional drop of dried blood. Her heart ached at the thought of Jack being hurt or worse, but she refused to let despair take hold. She had to keep moving. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker and more oppressive. The air was thick with moisture, and the ground was slick with moss and decaying leaves. Emily's muscles ached, and her injuries from the previous night's attack throbbed painfully. She paused to catch her breath and assess her wounds, wrapping a makeshift bandage around a particularly deep cut on her arm. Suddenly, a rustling noise behind her made her freeze. She turned slowly, her flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. At first, she saw nothing, but then the shadows seemed to shift, revealing a grotesque creature emerging from the underbrush. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, part human, part animal, with elongated limbs and glowing eyes that burned with a malevolent intelligence. The creature let out a guttural growl and lunged at her. Emily barely had time to react, swinging her flashlight like a weapon and striking the creature across the face. It recoiled, hissing in pain, but quickly recovered, advancing on her again. In a desperate bid for survival, Emily grabbed a fallen branch and wielded it like a club. She fought with every ounce of strength she had, each strike fueled by fear and determination. The creature was relentless, its claws slashing through the air, but Emily managed to hold her ground. After what felt like an eternity, she landed a lucky blow to the creature's head, sending it sprawling to the ground. She didn't wait to see if it would get back up. She turned and ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers seemed to cheer her on, their tones shifting from menacing to almost encouraging. Emily's flight led her to a small clearing, where she stumbled upon an ancient altar covered in strange, glowing symbols. At the center of the altar lay a book, similar to the one she had found the night before. She approached it cautiously, feeling a strange pull, as if the book was calling to her. Opening the book, she found detailed accounts of the forest's dark history. It spoke of a cult that had performed sacrifices to summon dark entities, using the forest as a gateway to another realm. The realization that her brother might have been taken by these entities filled her with a renewed sense of urgency. She had to find Jack and put an end to the horrors of the Whispering Woods. But as she read on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the forest seemed to close in around her, as if aware of her intentions. Emily's hands trembled as she held the ancient book, its pages filled with dark rituals and sinister illustrations. The whispers around her grew louder, their tone shifting to one of urgency and desperation. It was as if the forest itself was aware that she was uncovering its secrets, and it did not want her to proceed. The book revealed the horrifying truth about the Whispering Woods. Centuries ago, a cult had used the forest to perform dark rituals, sacrificing innocents to summon malevolent entities from another realm. The cult believed that these entities would grant them unimaginable power, but instead, they unleashed a curse upon the forest. The entities they summoned were trapped between worlds, and the forest became their prison, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead was perilously thin. The gnarled tree she had seen the previous night was a focal point of the cult's rituals, a gateway between realms. The symbols carved into its bark were wards to keep the entities contained, but over the years, the wards had weakened. The creatures that now roamed the forest were once human, twisted and corrupted by the dark forces they had summoned. Emily's heart ached as she read a passage about the cult's final sacrifice, a young man who had tried to escape but was captured and offered to the entities as a last-ditch effort to gain control. The description of the man matched Jack's physical appearance, and Emily's stomach churned at the thought of her brother being subjected to such a fate. Determined to save Jack, Emily continued reading, searching for any information that could help her defeat the dark forces and free her brother. The book mentioned a ritual that could close the gateway and banish the entities back to their realm, but it required a great sacrifice. The person performing the ritual would have to offer their life force to power the spell, ensuring the entities could never return. Emily's resolve wavered as she considered the implications. She had come to save her brother, but if she performed the ritual, she might not survive. The thought of Jack's terrified face flashed through her mind, and she knew what she had to do. She would save her brother, no matter the cost. As she prepared to leave the clearing, the whispers reached a fever pitch, the voices almost deafening. She could hear her name being called, but also Jack's voice, crying out for help. The forest seemed to pulse with a dark energy, the shadows shifting and writhing as if alive. With the book in hand, Emily retraced her steps, following the symbols she had seen earlier. The forest grew darker, the air thick with the scent of decay and something far more sinister. Her flashlight flickered, and she quickened her pace, knowing that time was running out. She reached the ancient tree once more, the gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The symbols carved into its bark glowed faintly, but their power was waning. Emily placed the book on the altar at the base of the tree and began to chant the incantation described in its pages. As she spoke the ancient words, the ground beneath her began to tremble, and the air crackled with energy. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices pleading, cursing, and crying out in pain. Emily felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if her very life force was being drawn from her. In the midst of the chaos, she saw a figure emerging from the shadows. Jack. He looked pale and gaunt, but he was alive. Emily's heart leapt with hope, but she knew she had to finish the ritual. With the last of her strength, she completed the incantation, the final words echoing through the forest. The ground shook violently, and a blinding light erupted from the tree, engulfing the clearing. Emily felt herself being pulled into the light, her body growing weaker with each passing second. The last thing she saw was Jack's terrified face, reaching out for her, before everything went black. The blinding light from the tree engulfed the entire clearing, its intensity overwhelming Emily's senses. She felt her consciousness slipping away, her body weakening as the ritual drew her life force. Just as she was about to succumb to the darkness, a surge of determination coursed through her veins. She couldn't let it end like this. She had to save Jack. With a final, desperate effort, Emily clung to the remnants of her strength and forced herself to stay conscious. The light began to subside, revealing the ancient tree now pulsating with a dark, malevolent energy. Shadows writhed around its base, and from them emerged the cult leader. his eyes glowing with a sinister light. The cult leader was a grotesque figure, his features twisted by centuries of dark magic. He regarded Emily with a mixture of amusement and disdain, his voice a chilling whisper that seemed to resonate with the forest itself. "You are too late," he sneered. "The ritual is incomplete. The entities will be free, and you will join the countless souls trapped here." Emily's heart raced, but she stood her ground, clutching the book tightly. "I won't let that happen," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'll finish the ritual and end this nightmare." The cult leader laughed, a sound that sent chills down Emily's spine. "You are but a feeble mortal. What makes you think you can stop me?" Drawing upon the knowledge she had gleaned from the book, Emily began to chant a counterspell, her voice gaining strength with each word. The shadows around the tree seemed to recoil, and the cult leader's expression twisted with anger. "No," he hissed, advancing on her. "You cannot stop what has already begun." Emily continued her chant, her voice rising above the whispers and the cult leader's threats. She could feel the power of the ritual building, a force that resonated deep within her soul. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the air crackled with energy. The cult leader lunged at her, but Emily stood firm, focusing all her energy on the counterspell. As she reached the final words, a blinding light erupted from the book, enveloping both her and the cult leader. The force of the ritual surged through her, tearing at her very essence. Emily felt herself being pulled apart, her consciousness fracturing as the dark forces resisted her efforts, but she refused to give in. With one final, defiant scream, she completed the counterspell, the words echoing through the forest like a thunderclap. The light intensified, and the cult leader's form disintegrated, his screams mingling with the cacophony of whispers. The ground shook violently, and the ancient tree split open, a torrent of dark energy spilling forth. Emily could feel her life force draining away, but she knew she had succeeded. As the darkness closed in around her, she caught one last glimpse of Jack, his face etched with a mix of relief and sorrow. Emily smiled, knowing that she had saved him. The light consumed her, and she felt herself slipping into the void, her final thought a silent prayer that Jack would live on, free from the horrors of the whispering woods. Jack's vision cleared as the blinding light subsided, revealing the shattered remains of the ancient tree and the dissipating shadows that had once plagued the forest. He blinked, disoriented, trying to process the events that had just transpired. The oppressive atmosphere of the whispering woods seemed to lift, the air feeling lighter, almost breathable again. He stumbled forward, his legs weak from exhaustion and fear. "Emily," he called out, his voice hoarse and desperate. The clearing was eerily silent now, the whispers finally silenced. He scanned the area, his heart sinking as he saw no sign of his sister. "Emily, where are you?" Jack's voice broke, tears streaming down his face. He fell to his knees, the weight of everything crashing down on him. The thought that Emily had sacrificed herself to save him was unbearable. She had always been the stronger one, the protector, and now she was gone. But then, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper reached his ears. It wasn't the sinister voices of the forest, but something different, something familiar. He looked up, hope flickering in his heart. The sound seemed to come from the altar where Emily had placed the book. Jack approached the altar cautiously, his breath catching as he saw the book lying open, its pages glowing faintly. The symbols on the pages seemed to pulse with a gentle light, and within that light, he could almost see a silhouette, a figure that looked like Emily, with trembling hands. Jack reached out and touched the book. A surge of energy coursed through him, and the light intensified, enveloping him in a warm, comforting glow. He closed his eyes, letting the energy flow through him, feeling a connection to Emily, to her strength and courage. "Jack," a voice whispered, soft and soothing, "you have to go. Live your life. Be happy. I've done what I needed to do." "No, Emily," Jack cried, tears streaming down his face. "I can't leave you here. I can't do this without you." "You can," the voice insisted gently. "And you must. The forest is free now. You're free. Live for both of us." The light began to fade, and Jack felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that Emily was right, that he had to honor her sacrifice by living his life to the fullest. With a heavy heart, he closed the book. The glow fading completely, Jack stood up, the weight of the world on his shoulders, but a new resolve burning within him. He looked around the clearing one last time, taking in the now tranquil surroundings. The Whispering Woods, once a place of terror and darkness, had been cleansed by his sister's bravery. He turned and began to walk back the way he had come, the path seeming clearer, the forest less menacing. As he left the woods behind, he felt Emily's presence with him, a guiding light that would never fade. Jack emerged from the forest, the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds. He took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. He was free, and he would live on, carrying Emily's memory with him always. The Whispering Woods were silent now. The whispers of the past finally lay to rest,